welcome everybody on this wonderful occasion, 150th anniversary of Montessori's birth. Happy birthday, Montessori. And we are delighted to be able to share with you some of the recent research we have done or recent reflections into Montessori's time as a feminist, into her time in India, and also all the culmination of her work in becoming or campaigning for peace education. But all this work was actually prompted by Sid's and Jana's work on Montessori. I believe this is a fantastic global research or global resource for the Montessori community of historical photographs and historical data about Montessori that anybody can access. So thank you, Sid, and thank you, Jana, and welcome to the conversation. We will have Gwendolyn to help us guide us through the process. And it's absolutely wonderful to see so many of you, some of whom were present in our conversations yesterday during Montessori Everywhere. So it's wonderful to see you second time round or on the second day. Gwendolyn, would you like to remind us of the ground rules, please?
Yes, good evening, everyone. And it's so lovely to see you. It's a weekend of celebrations for Maria Montessori's 150th birthday. So the ground rules from a technical perspective are, please can you keep your microphones on mute, because that means that your background noise doesn't interfere with the speakers as they share their reflections and their thoughts with you. Pop any questions that you have in the chat box. You can find the chat box by clicking on the little chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're watching on Facebook, then pop your questions in the comments on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you there. That's it. That's all there's to it.
But before we begin, I see so many familiar faces. I must say hello to Lynn Lawrence from AMI. Hello, Lynn. Hello, Miriam from Montessori Europe. And of course, great pleasure to welcome Marlene Barron. I wonder where you are speaking from, Marlene. Is it from New York? Is it from China? Where are you at the moment?
New York.
Ah, well, so have you retired or are you trying to retire?
No, I'm self-quarantining in my apartment.
Ah. Well, I hope that you will not get any illness in the quarantine time and you will be able to join everybody's life very soon. Welcome, everybody. It is a huge pleasure to be hosting this webinar. So starting with Montessori, how did it all begin? How did you start working on this resource for the Montessori community?
Thank you, Barbara, for the wonderful introduction. The idea has been brewing for quite some time now. I have been collecting historical images that related to Montessori for several years now, and they come from trawling through archives, journals, archival libraries, books, the internet, and friends who share their personal collection with me. So last June 2019, I started Montessori. And I've known Jana for quite some time now, and I knew that she shared the same passion for Montessori history and Montessori writings, and so it's been such a wonderful journey together with her. And it was her idea to bring together Montessori quotes with those historical images, which I think has been really powerful. What those photos and quotes do for me personally is that they have helped me shift my perspective significantly. I think we have a tendency to glorify the past. And what I quite often find is that when we see photos of early Montessori classrooms, it unsettles our perceptions of what constitutes good Montessori practice. And in some ways, it enables us to loosen our grip on rigid expressions of Montessori that do not really serve the child of today. I'm sure Jana has more to say about that.
Would you like to add, Jana?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much. First of all, this is awesome. It has been such a glorious 2 days. And I think that so many of us have had such a hard time since March, and to really be able to fill each other's cups over this last 2 days and with our common passions has been just so rewarding. I know for me as both a participant and as a viewer. I was so grateful when Sid reached out. It was just all I could do. I was so excited. I could not stand it. And we both love and feel kind of the same way, I believe, that so many times people have these the quotes that we all know, be a ray of light, and, you know, a child is a discoverer. And those are great quotes. But Montessori's books and lectures and articles that we have so much more to offer than that. And we believe really help put us back on the path of seeing what everything that was intended, not just certain parts that people like to glean out. And when we can find those quotes that really have us shift our perspective, and the pictures that kind of epitomize those quotes, I feel like that's just the sweetest spot to be. And when we look back on that, when we look back at all of these pictures, I mean, Sid must have collected 1,000 pictures easily, at least. And to see so many of those with children outside, carrying the geometric cabinet outside, you know, more than one child sitting on a rug outside, it really helps us, I think, be grounded and real and not so dogmatic.
Isn't it wonderful that the present time, which can seem to be so complicated and complex for the practitioners, in fact, gives us such wonderful opportunity to share children's experiences outside through the webinars that we have done in London during lockdown, but also during all the conversations yesterday during Montessori Everywhere. Repeatedly, practitioners expressed the idea that they are beginning to see the children from a slightly different perspective, because the outside gives more opportunities for socialization. It gives opportunities for really deep engagement, deep concentration, and also the joy that the children have when they come back into the classroom, when they actually revisit the materials again. It gives them a huge strength. So yes, we are constantly reminded through your pictures and through the quotes of the focus on our work, and that is the child. But I wonder if you have any plans to extend what you do or develop it further, or will you just beaver away and continue to add to what you have started? Because just adding is a huge rich resource as it is. What do you think?
Well, Montessori is really an outcome of personal passion. So we don't particularly have any plans other than to continue doing what we are doing. But we did have talks about interviewing some first generation or second generation Montessorians, or yeah, I mean, the core aspect we want to do is challenge practice and help us to think further, as well as make narratives that are not commonly available more dominant, more popular or available. So yeah.
And we have definitely been challenged within the last 2 weeks, Sid, when we were trying to find the reference to following the child, because somebody recently said to me, oh, Montessori didn't say anywhere that we follow the child. But in fact, with your diligent research, you have found reference to following the child in relation to children's moving and giving them freedom to move in the Kalashistra publication of The Absorbent Mind from 1949. So I was very rejoiced, because for me, that idea of following the child and being led by the child in our practice is extremely important. And really, for me, that's what we are celebrating today. That's the legacy, giving the child voice, giving the child agency, enabling the child to express solidarity. So when we started our research, we began with Montessori's feminism because she was really very, very forward-looking, and I'm always amazed how mindful she was of women working and the plight of women. So what did you find interesting in that context of Montessori's feminist years?
So Montessori feminism is what is now called as the first wave of feminism, which focused on legal issues, particularly women's right to vote and property ownership and stuff like that. But when you look into Montessori's personal history of feminist activism, you find that it fundamentally emerges from her lived experience as a young girl and a young woman. The various obstacles she had to face, which most of you would know, the lack of support from her father for her educational choices, the general disapproval of studying alongside boys for her high school diploma, the hurdles she had to face in entering a male-dominated field, as well as the relentless taunting and the ridicule that she had to endure for being in a medical training that was, male-dominated. So despite all of that, Montessori successfully graduated from the University of Rome 1 month before her 26th, birthday. Since then, she was actively involved in the early feminist movement. And these are things that we cover in more detail in the Roots of Montessori MOOC, the course that's available. But when you really look into the contemporary sort of feminism, or contemporary, how it applies to contemporary context, you find that feminism has developed considerably and has focused on dismantling white patriarchy in its various forms. So in the early childhood context, I find that one of the key ways that this has surfaced is through feminist research. For instance, the past few decades, there has been a reified focus on recruiting men into the sector. And while normalizing men's involvement in early years is important, what feminist research has highlighted is that the popular narratives about what men bring into early years are sweeping generalizations of men, which in turn marginalize men who do not fit into those molds. But you also find that the recruitment narratives have also painted women as basically failing young children, particularly boys in relation to boys' achievement. We also find that by framing gender diversification as adding more men into the sector, it inadvertently conceals the immense diverse and variability of gender, for instance, the intersex, non-binary, trans communities that are very present in our communities. And so I think today's feminist work in education constitutes of dismantling oppressive structures, promoting a practice and ethic of caring, rather than competition, and creating inclusive spaces that really celebrate difference, all of which Montessori encompasses.
Thanks very much, Sid. And what does feminism mean to you, Jana, as we experience it today?
Well, first I want to talk about how Montessori worked. It probably without even realizing it. My bachelor's is in English literature, and specifically the new women writers, which were women who were writing at the turn of the century, and how they had to at once, because of the angel in the home, the angel in the house paradigm about how women were allowed to, either be an angel or a devil. There were very limited ways that they could express themselves at that time, at the end of the Victorian period. And so these new women writers had to find ways to be acceptable and push boundaries. And even though I know that this couldn't have been intentional, one of the things that I see repeated in Montessori's work, especially her early work, is her reference. She's showing you that she knows what men have said so far. You know, she's very deft at pulling in and showing that she has this research and male backing behind her thinking processes, and that's going to give her credibility in both the people who are hearing her, the men who are hearing her, and showing that she knows what she's doing. And I feel like that is just genius. Not everybody can do it, and she was the best at it. And I feel like if we look at writers in general, that we don't pay, and I know because Montessori was a lecturer, it's kind of tricky, but if we are looking at writers in general, the way she was able to marry those two things, I think was just brilliant and should easily earn her a seat at the table of philosophers too, which is that's another talk we'll have to have at some point. But I feel like as far as what we read about her work and equal pay for equal rights and ending, child labor and what she was willing to sacrifice, I think that it's a lesson for us today. You know, when she was willing to close down and leave rather than knuckle under, I think is profound. You know, that was her life's work, and to be able to stand up, I think, in that time, when she had finally gained the kind of attention that she had gained, is really a lesson that we should all take to heart. And so I think today, from my perspective, what I would say is that should be encouraging to us, you know, that when we know what we're doing is what we should be doing, that we don't settle and we don't be quiet. We get into good trouble.
Thank you so much. And of course, we are constantly reminded of the challenges women face in separating from their children, in working and being carers in the family. And Montessori was so aware of those issues in her day. She was so keen to make sure that the mothers could go to work without having to worry for their children. And that is a constant concern. I know that every working mum, when she has to leave her baby or her young child in a setting for the first time, she is worried. She's very concerned about the well-being of her child. And we need to be mindful of that in our relationship with parents, and we need to continue to work to help parents understand what we do and why the provision that we offer is so very beneficial to their children as they grow, not only as individuals, but also as social beings and contributors to society as they mature. And of course,
Sorry.
Yes, go on, Jana.
This is the perfect example of this is when we talk about, everyone's heard this saying, we all do better when we all do better. And that was what Montessori's experience, that's what she believed. That's what she says over and over from the time that she's working at the first CASA all the way through, is that we are doing this. This is not easy for adults, but our work is to do this for children. It's the thing we all agree on, and we're all better for it. And that's why we need to start, that's where we need to start. And I'm so glad that you said that.
Good, thank you. And of course, we could discuss the feminist issues for a very long time, but we would also like to address the second topic we have chosen to explore, and that is a Montessori's time in India. And it was a topic which was particularly close to your heart, Jana. And I think from Montessori's perspective, what I value about that time is that she had 6 years of being stuck in one country. She couldn't really travel. So it was an opportunity to somehow concentrate more on her writing and on her research, but also I think she must have valued the time spent with Mario, because it was for the first time, Mario as a grown-up rather than Mario as a child, when they were working very, very closely together. And there seems to be a lot of evidence that Mario truly benefited from this time spent with his mother. So what did you draw from your Indian experience researching a little bit further about Montessori?
Thank you. I really was fascinated by Montessori's time in India, just for a number of reasons. Things that I love as a close reader, to watch what happened with Montessori's writing from her first book until 1950, 1952, and see what things stayed the same, and what things she modified. You know, with every edition of the book, if you read Lazzini's book, you can see that every edition, she picked and chose very carefully what was going to be included in different editions of books. And in India, as you said, she was really in a bell jar, kind of. She was in a situation where she had intensive focus. She was not distracted by the traveling, which I'm sure she loved doing when she could travel freely, and going to conferences. I know we all love going to conferences and seeing our colleagues and sharing things. But at that time, you're right, she really was able to turn her gaze a different way. I think one of the fascinating things when you look at her time there is her getting to spend time with Mario, which I think is incredible because of it's almost a symbiotic relationship between her being in her mind there, and him being on the kind of boots on the ground kind of person who was in a classroom working with children all the time. And then the discussion that they would have and how they would feed and nourish each other, I think was brilliant. I also think that this was the first time where she was settled primarily out of a white Western perspective into something that looked a little more global. And that, I think, changed her. I think she had a new understanding about seeing all different ages, all different people from all different walks of life, from all different corners of the earth, and how this really solidified for her this cosmic relationship that we all have, and Mario as well. And the other fascinating thing, of course, is the work that she did on 0 to 3. And I think that when we look at what happened in 0 to 3 in India, we really see a culmination, kind of like what ends up kind of being the end of the circle, right? So she spent all of this time studying, and then what she comes back to and spends a lot of time on too are those first 3 years. And in this environment where she can see how significant it is and how universal this time is, that it's this time where we need to have solidarity and an understanding of the universal needs of children, and how all of us play such an important role in what humanity is going to look like from the time that children are born. So it's kind of bookended, I think, her work in India. And I think, you know, it will lead into what you're going to talk about, which is her, you know, her cosmic and her peace work. But for me, those were the most profound things to see. I love looking at her writing during this time. So we see, you know, as you said, she's talked about mothers before. She talked about them in Dr. Montessori's own handbook. You can see her talking about mothers, but it is different there. It is utilitarian there. And here it becomes more philosophical in the way that she appreciates what this work can do and how it requires this this kind of meeting of all of us together. And I just love that.
I personally just loved the fact that they have returned to nature, and they being in the Himalayas and living in the bungalow where they had lots of space and lots of huge amount of grounds, that they suddenly reconnected with nature. And I'm sure that close capacity to observe what was happening and children's reactions to nature enabled them to make closer cosmic connections, and really focusing on our place within nature and within society and within cosmos, and our deep interdependence with nature, as we have been reminded during the last 3 months, because we thought we were omnipotent, and suddenly the pandemic has reminded us that we are not in control of everything, and that we need to use our creative resources to be able to manage life. And we have discovered some of the human qualities that Montessori writes about: our compassion, our solidarity, respect for the people who serve community. It is really, I couldn't have thought of a better time to reconnect with Montessori in India and her discoveries and what we have experienced as a community recently. But
I think that when you're talking about the importance of nature, that just to emphasize the interviews that were done, I think that David Kahn did these interviews, correct, with Mario, and how he speaks specifically to what you're saying about the importance of bringing that experience, like you said yesterday, don't think of it as nature education, think of it as an experience of nature. And what she says at that time is that if children have this memory, it will be something that they will want to protect. This is how you inspire children to want to care for the world, is to have them have experiences in nature where they are going to form part of themselves while they are having that experience. And that's what Mario says at the school that he was working at with Miss Lena, is that, you know, she asked for books and he was like, you don't need books. You have the biggest book, you have the best book of all, you have nature. And I think that that's a lesson for all of us that we should all take to heart.
And I think we are so fortunate today because we actually don't need to know everything in nature. Our mobile phones and our apps provide an instant resource, an instant opportunity to share information with the children or finding together about some of these things. And I think that's really quite wonderful to use what is available to us in the 21st century in order to pursue some of Montessori's ideas of the middle of the 20th century. But what about you, Sid? How do you feel about Montessori's time in India?
Because I've been delving into indigenous sort of scholarship in readings, I've been particularly interested in the importance to recognize that Montessori's cosmic education is a worldview that is very similar to the worldviews of many indigenous cultures, like the Maori culture, Australian and North American indigenous communities, as well as from India. I mean, you have the Indian school of thought called the Advaita Vedanta, which is, you know, very much based on this idea of interdependence and entanglement. And these views have existed for centuries and millennia, you know, so it's not something that's really new. So currently, there is a resurgence of similar worldviews in cutting-edge sort of scholarship. It goes under the name posthumanism, which is the sort of area that I'm actually researching in, which basically decenters the human and sees us enmeshed in the world, inextricably entangled with the non-human world. And over a year ago, you know, Professor Jane Osgood and I published a paper where we followed the Pink Tower in its various journeys before it made its way into the Montessori classroom. And we traced the journey from the beech forest in southern Germany, transported to Sri Lanka in container ships, mass-produced through, you know, cheap labor, and distributed to schools around the world. So what we found in that sort of, you know, unearthing was that, you know, how the materialities of the pink cubes were, and the stories were, you know, how the materialities were embedded in the pink cubes, had stories of heavy carbon footprints and sustainable foresting practices and labor exploitation and corporate capitalism and so forth and so on. So what we came to realize that we are implicated in all these problematic issues in doing Montessori. And this kind of way of seeing the world, you know, it really intensifies our ethical responsibility, but it also highlights our limitations, you know, that there is no easy solution, that there is no prescriptive solution. There is no easy answer to those issues we're entangled with. But besides, I find besides being able to push for structural changes through solidarity and solidarity action, I think we could do what we could, what we really have to come to terms with is that we are limited in what we can do, And the best that we can do is make the most caring choices that we are capable of. But the fact is, nothing we do is going to be innocent. So the cosmic education particularly can be relevant in the context of, the ecological crisis that we are in, that we're facing, which is, evidenced by the ongoing anthropogenic effects, that are polluting oceans and rivers and decimating plants and causing forced displacement of animals from their habitat. So I think we cannot afford to think in human-centric terms anymore, which also goes on to, make us question about what knowledges we need to be, attaching ourselves to. Is it knowledge that only looks at human progress, or are we going to look at how entangled we are in all the other processes? So that's my thought.
But of course, Montessori does remind us of this to educate the human potential when she explores some of the relationships that we have with nature and we have with the environment. And what I personally have always come to value about Montessori is that from the very, very early times, from the nursery school, we make the children mindful of the resources that are available to us. Yes, we don't throw out the cuttings. The nursery age children can snip and snip and snip away for hours on end, produce piles of little cuttings, but we never throw them away. We always keep them to use them for something else. It is a very, very tiny little offering, but in fact, it already plants the seed that we need to be careful of our resources. I think that I remember when I was first a student, and then when I was told that, I was instantly connected with my grandmother, who was so very, very careful in keeping all the resources within the house, because when I was a child, there was a real shortage of everything in the Czech Republic, and a real shortage of food. And so we have treasured everything that was available to us. And then when at the age of 18, when I came to England and I went for the first shop in the supermarket, and I could see that there were 6 different kinds of frozen peas, I just thought, what for? We don't need different kinds of frozen peas. We just need good frozen peas to have. And once again, people have been connected with this during the current times, because when there are shortages, people suddenly realize that the choice is not essential, and maybe that will connect us again back to where the resources come from, how do we get them, and how we use them. So it gives us an opportunity to connect children with Montessori's cosmic vision and the vision of interdependence, and also our responsibility in relation to the planet, and how we look after the things that we have. And of course, the feminism and the time in India were also kind of evident in Montessori's initial advocacy for world peace. And particularly in the 1930s, she made many speeches promoting education for peace. The most famous quote of that time is, of course, the fact that it is the job of education to guarantee world peace. Politicians deal with wars, but we look forward to the future. We help children to become peaceful and respectful. And I think that again is from the very early stages of Montessori education, is reflected in the way how we talk to the children, how we treat them, how we relate to them in terms of respectful and trusting relationships, in terms of grace and courtesy, in terms of valuing each other's kind of contributions to the environment and how we share resources. So the cosmic vision is planted, I would say, almost from the moment when the baby is born, because how the adult relates to the baby will be reflected how the baby then and the toddler relates to others within their environment. And I think that is really important when we think about peace education. And of course, the notion of world peace is hugely aspirational, and maybe it is never achievable, but just because it is not we may not see it achieved in our lifetime, but it is still very important that we plant the seeds of the respect for others. For me, that element of humanity within Montessori's writing is incredibly important, and the value of the human life, particularly in today's context. We are constantly reminded that human life is not valued in the same way across the whole globe, and that should really be our campaign for the future. That's what we should campaign for, that children are respectful to everybody and value their contribution to society, irrespective of what those people do. And then a job well done needs to be always appreciated, irrespective of the status of the job. And I think that's, again, element of what we have observed recently that is important for us to be reminded of. But what I love about the early speeches of Montessori is that she advocates to have a minister for children, and that she wants to have a party for children. And we are very far away from that happening today, but we have given the children voice through the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We are talking much more about the child's voice today. And I just wonder how you too feel about the child's right to have a voice, and how we would support it in today's society, or how we can do that. Jana, since you are in the classroom more often than either Sid or I now.
Okay, wow. Well, it's not something that's going to be just easy peasy lemon squeezy, is it? I think that it requires, so much of what Montessori talks about is very little about materials, right? Just in the scope of her work, what she talks about materials is just minuscule comparatively. And she talks a lot about how important it is that adults recognize, acknowledge, and root out their biases, their prejudices, and their bad beliefs that are going to negatively impact children. So I would say that our first step has to be introspection, in realizing that, for the most part, we grow up in a culture that is established and based in various forms of kinds of racism and racist practices, or colonialism and colonialist practices. And we have to engage in the process of our self-reflection and how we've benefited from that, and what we can do to both make sure that the children that we spend time with don't have the same experience, or the same kind of, that we do our best to make sure that we expose them to different ways of being. And I think that involves the Montessori community working with parents and supporting parents. It involves teachers being able to be supported in having that ongoing practice of self-development and self-reflection. I think that we need to do a better job in reaching out to parents, and we need, as school leaders, as a school leader, we need to do a better job in making sure that we're providing spaces for children who would not otherwise be able to attend, because money is a huge barrier. So I think when we start with those little steps, which are huge steps, but when we start with those things, is, she says, take the log out of your eye, before you can help get the splinter, the speck of dust out of the child's eye. That's where we should start. I don't know either that it will be, I don't know how quickly it will be attainable, but I do want to say that, you know, when we talk about, I'm so glad you brought up the party of the child, and there are steps, but I don't feel like, you know, I feel like we should just like start the party. What are we waiting on? Like, why can't we be the people? We are the people. And all it takes is people saying, yeah, I'm totally in for that party. Let's do that thing. Because talking, you know, when we think before we do any action, we think not only does this not hurt someone else's child, does this help someone else's child? And if it doesn't, what can I do? Or what can we do as a school? What can I do as an individual? What can we do as a school or a society to make sure that we're doing things that help other people's children? And I realize that there are people who think that would be a little woo-woo, but anybody who knows me knows that I am not woo-woo. I think that this is attainable, and I think it's achievable, but it just takes people saying, okay, we're going to do this thing. And I believe the Montessorians that I know are so hard-headed and passionate that I don't think that it's impossible. I think we could do it. So I know that, you know, studying yourself, working in your community, and then thinking globally and acting locally is a great place to start.
And what about you, Sid?
For me, what really inspires me when I look back to Montessori's work is that, you know, that we cannot forget that Montessori's work was a response to social injustice, her feminism as well as child advocacy. You know, it was a concerted, you know, focused work to address these injustices. So if we want to continue doing Montessori's work in the classroom and in our societies, I think in order to be true to the Montessori roots, we must start with social justice. You know, so social justice must be the starting point. And peace, like Montessori says, it's very popularly known now that peace cannot exist without justice. For me, I guess the task starts with normalizing difference in the classroom, and not simply adding people who look different, but rather creating space structurally as well as in practice for different ways of thinking and different ways of being to emerge, and to actually consider that spaces can be inherently racialized, gendered, and classed, and ableist, and cisgendered, and so forth, you know, which is a good place to start to think about the structures that produce early childhood. But much more than that, for me, I think listening is core to our practice, listening to children's views, to how they view the world, how they construct their world, and having dialogues with them about the world, having dialogue with them with what emerges in the classroom, and creating stories together that are liberating and inclusive. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sid. Somebody in the chat has reminded us that it is the children in the third, or young people in the third plane of development, that come to have the voice in which they express their views and they campaign. And as we have seen recently, there's Greta and others who campaign for the environment, the power of the young child who actually has been given the voice, not when they were teenagers, but they have been given the voice in the nursery through the physical independence that we have granted them, and through the cognitive and emotional autonomy that is fostered in the Montessori environment. So yes, we can help children to become more powerful, but we also as practitioners need to think about our role. We need to think about the way how we use language, particularly with children on a daily basis. For me, that is the biggest concern at the moment. We can be so judgmental so very quickly, and all our prejudices are very revealed in the way how we express our ideas and how we encourage the children, and how we put our agenda in front of the child as if that was the most desirable thing. In fact, if we step back and observe, the child will tell us very clearly what their agenda is. And that agenda may not always be easy for us, but it is important that the child is given a voice in that kind of way. And I would like each one of you who have joined the webinar today and who continue to work with young children and young people to reflect on your role and what you could do better as we begin the academic year and after the celebrations of Montessori's birthday. There is much in returning to Montessori's writing and being inspired by her words. There is real importance for us continuing to revisit Montessori writing as we practice, to be reminded of what really matters, and also to be able to engage in conversation as we have done yesterday, and as I'm sure lots of us will continue to engage in conversations following Montessori's birthday as we begin the academic year. I wonder if you have anything that you would like to share with our audience, Jana, as we come towards the end of our discussion.
Let's see, there's so much. I guess I would say really is that this is important work. And I know that teachers are not paid according to their worth. Nobody get into this business because you make money, because you do not make money at this work. But it is the most important work happening, I believe, right now in the world, because how children's brains experience life will be perpetuated in how they treat other people, the way that they treat the planet, and what they internalize about themselves and about other people. And for that reason, it is very moving to think the people who have picked up this mantle of working toward basically peace. And that we do that by understanding ourselves. So keep attending things, keep reading things, go back and read over and over, have conversations with people. You don't have to pay a lot of money. You just have to start listening and meditating on what you hear, and then taking small steps. Because if we all take small steps, we will get there. It's a long journey. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we can do it together. So join a community that feeds your soul and your passion for Montessori, and keep going, and know that every interaction that you have with a child, every way you receive their moods or their fears or their anxieties, or any way that you celebrate with them, is taking that step. And remember that we don't have control over what children remember about us. But if we just keep in mind that we may be, for those children, the face of love that they see that day. You may be the face of love that they see that day. And that is such an awesome thing to do, and it's free. So keep doing it. Don't give up. I know it's hard right now, especially when you're trying to do it over Zoom, but look, we're all together over Zoom. So good things can happen, and reach out, because we're always interested in supporting people.
And you, Sid?
What can I say after what Jana said?
I know.
But intensify care. I mean, that's probably what I would say. Think about how caring you can be, and how more caring you can be in all your relationships and interactions.
And we, as Jana said, why not start today? Lynn reminded us in the comments that we are the people. It is up to us. And if we change the life of one child, we are a huge community, and that in itself will benefit society. So as we progress towards the 151st anniversary of Montessori's birth, I hope that you will all be able to engage with children and with their parents, because their parents need our help and our support, and they need to be explained what it really means to be in the Montessori classroom and what we are offering to the children. So please continue your important work, continue to reflect, realize that we are not infallible, that we will make mistakes, but we need to learn from the mistakes so that we continue in our service of children. Thank you so very much for your company for tonight. And here is to the party of the child.
Here,
Barbara, are we sharing the
Yes, if you would like to know a little bit more about the research that we have done on these 3 topics, please look at our open learning platform resource. It is a free course. It's very light. It's not huge onerous study of Montessori, but we hope that it will set you again on a new route to look at what Montessori has to offer us. And Sid has prepared a really beautiful little overview of the pictures so we can travel through time with Montessori.
I
Okay,
hope you can hear this.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. And I hope you will have a glass of wine and toast Montessori for tonight. Happy birthday.